Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the HaskinCast Podcast. I am your host, Scott Haskin, and I am here with an unbelievable guest. You guys are just going to be amazed by this man's journey. He is just off at the top. I mean, he wrote the book, Grateful Guilt, Living in the Shadow of My Heart Transplant, two-time heart transplant survivor, which, I mean, the odds have to be just astronomical. And we're going to get into all of that stuff. He is a director, a producer, a director of photography, a lyricist. He's a contributing writer to Videography Magazine, the vice president of Transplant Speakers International. I could go on, but that's already too much. Let's welcome Stephen Taibbi to the show. Did I say that right?
You did indeed.
Oh, good. I always get so worried about that. You know, I check with you before we start to make sure I have it right. And then that was like 5 minutes ago. So I want to be respectful of you, obviously. So very good. Well, how are you today?
I'm great. Better than I deserve to be.
Ever since you said I'm Italian, I've started moving my hands around. Have you noticed that?
It's contagious.
It really is. Yeah. I would say, though, that you deserve to be as great as you want to be. And I think
Yes.
that's one of the things that we really all have the ability and the right to do. I'm just really glad you're here because you've survived so much from a health perspective. Let's just start really quickly from the beginning. You were born and you went into surgery.
Right. I had 3 surgeries the day I was born. They were relatively minor, but people didn't know what it portended, because I had little birth defects that they thought they could correct or mitigate, and they didn't understand what the birth defects symbolized, and that didn't show up until I was 5 years old.
Wow. Were these pre-planned surgeries, like from ultrasounds they discovered this, or was it you came out and they're like, oh, we better figure out what to do really quick and put them in surgery?
I don't think they had ultrasound in 53. So, I mean, I'm so old that I kicked a rock the other day and it said, "Hey, Stephen." So, but I mean, when I was having my surgeries, I mean, compared to today, things were really rudimentary. I mean, there was an autoclave in my room for, and so I just wasn't thriving was the way. But my grandfather we wanted to check my grandfather for tuberculosis. He was living with us, so we all got X-rays, and that's how they discovered my heart problem. If we hadn't had that X-ray, now my mother knew there was something wrong. She was a nurse, but no doctor would listen to her. And if it hadn't been for that X-ray, checking because of my grandfather, they would have missed it.
Wow. Life is so, that's one of the things I love about the almost randomness of life is that it wasn't, I mean, it's really unfortunate that no one was listening to her. I find that that's a huge problem in our societies, that we just tend to either not believe people or not want to get involved or not want to deal with anything. So we just brush it off.
Yes.
And that right off the bat, I mean, you could be dead just off of that alone.
Yeah, it's when they discovered the problem, and my doctor called my parents and said and referred us to a cardiologist who had just moved in from Houston, who my parents said they would have gone to Houston to go to this guy, but he had just moved to Garden City, Long Island, from Houston, and he was like the cat's meow at the time, and he said to my parents, he needs surgery now, and I was, next thing I know, I'm in a hospital. And, my whole life is like just explodes, everything just explodes from what was normal. Right. And I went to the surgery when I was 5 for ASD repair, atrial septum defect. It's known as a hole in the heart. So what that is, there's between the chambers, there's a wall that's called the septum. And there was a hole in it. And so the blood wasn't working properly because there was a hole, there was a leak. So they went in there when I was 5. And they discovered that I had 2 holes. And I also had a vein that was plumbed backward that was leaking into my lungs. So they had to, they fixed the one hole. At that time, the survival rate was 50% for a single surgery. And they told my parents I'd have to come back. They wanted me to get a little stronger. And I'd have to come back. And it turned out to be in almost a year. And then I had the second surgery. And up to that point, no one had ever lived through 2 for ASD repair. I was the first.
Wow, that's really amazing. Did you also, because of the, I would think that there was also issues with your circulation and other parts of your body that were as a result of your heart not pumping blood properly?
Yeah, I was a blue baby when I was born, cyanotic. But I was like skinny as skinny. And, I was not thriving, as they say. I was a pretty weak little kid,
Now, would you happen to know, because obviously science has changed dramatically since this time, if you were born today or say within the last few years, is this something that would have been caught much earlier or at all?
It's a nothing burger today. They actually go in through an artery, probably through the groin, and they go in there and they kind of looks like an umbrella for a drink, and they go in, they pop the umbrella into the hole, they sew it up, and it's done.
Wow. And to think because of the time that you happened to be born, you had to go through so much more trauma just because we weren't that advanced yet. I wonder about people in the 1800s and thinking about times when the lobotomy solved all the problems.
Yes, right.
Thankfully, you didn't have that, but
right. And they were done with leeches too, thankfully.
Oh, that's that's another one that's just not pleasant.
Right.
There was a time when they actually were putting people in mental institutions that loved to read books. They would say that you're reading too many books. There's something wrong with you. And I think, wow, really? We have come so far from.
Boy, I'd be in an asylum today then.
Oh, I'd love to read. I don't have the time, but I'm a huge, knowledge seeker for sure. So how old were you when you had your first transplant?
Well, before my transplant, let me just tell you this. Mm-hmm. My parents were told that I was almost going to be dead, like in months, the first time. Mm-hmm. Then they said I had maybe a year to live the second time. Then after I got the second surgery, they said to my parents, well, he survived this, but you'll be lucky if he gets to 10. And then I got older and older, and they said he's not going to get to 20. And on my 17th birthday, I had a heart block incident, and I had actually had surgery just before that because my heart was running out of control, and they put me on a drug that I turned out to be allergic to. And on my 17th birthday, I had a near fatal heart block incident, and I had the whole out of body experience, the whole thing. And that was before Kubler-Ross. So all of that was new to me. Everything I saw, I had never heard of before. And then when I survived that, by this time, my doctor had already told me when I was 16 that I had maybe a year to live. And that's when it happened with, when I was 17. And then he said to me, Stephen, he goes, you beat this one, but he goes, I doubt you'll get out of your 20s. And I just started chasing life with a hammer after that. I mean, every single day it was going to count for me,
Well, yeah, I mean, that's great because so many people, I think, would just fold under that and just be like, oh, this sucks. And, I deserve better and just, become the opposite, an advocate against themselves instead of one for, just soaking up every moment. Was there has to be a psychological damaging part setting those expectations for, well, they say it's only going to be a year. So, I mean, that had to weigh on you in some way.
Well, it's how I dealt with things was that I was like when they said, well, you're only going to live this long, I was kind of like, well, that's what you say. I was kind of like, I had all these, I developed all these strategies since my first month in a hospital. I developed a strategy when I was 5, which is pretty cool to develop anything when you're 5. It was really a psychological trick I played on myself, and it wasn't really an active thought. I just happened to fall into it, but I realized that it had helped me. And so when I went in the second time, I said, see, what else could I do, right? And then by the time they were telling me things when I was 16, I was really actively strategizing, actively planning, what can I do to make what they're saying not be true? And that became, so I was doing 2 things. I was doing what I called walking the 50-50 line. I was walking a tightrope where a breeze could knock me over in either direction, either to death or to life. And one of my strategies, which I still am doing right now, because I think we should all do this, is I still do that because you never know when a bus is going to hit you, So why aren't you living your fullest life right now? Nobody has promised tomorrow. Nobody's promised the next hour. For all I know, a plane's going to crash into my house. So nobody has promised anything. So I just kept developing strategies and ways of thinking. And I developed a technique I called bullying my heart, which I was doing since I was 10 or 11. And because I would just yell at my heart and order it to go back to work and stop feeling funny. And then I would do whatever I was doing that made it feel bad in the first place. Then I'd go back and do it. I just kept doing all those kinds of things. I'd always wanted to be a pilot. My doctor told me I couldn't be a pilot. He wouldn't sign the letter saying that it was okay. And I was really heartbroken about that. And then when I was on a television job with a kid I went to college with, who had the only job we ever worked together. And turns out he was a glider pilot. And we were right next to the glider port where he flew. And he told me who to go to. He said, you don't need a medical for being a glider pilot. You just need a driver's license.
Ah.
So next thing you know, 2 weeks later, I had my first lesson, and I became I have a pilot's license. I'm certified to fly gliders. I bought a glider on my 34th birthday. I bought it on my 34th birthday, which was the 17th anniversary of my almost dying at 17.
Mm-hmm. I was just thinking that, yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I did it deliberately. I actually made the date of the sale that day. And then it was, a little before that, I told my doctor, that I had become a pilot. And you should have seen all the colors he changed. He was so angry with me. And he goes like this, right into my face. He goes, whatever you do, no acrobatics, right? So 2 weeks later, I'm taking acrobatic lessons.
You're a little bit rock and roll, aren't you?
I don't know about that. I just know that I always felt like if I gave into the idea that something could kill me, it would. So if I didn't give into the idea that it would kill me, maybe it wouldn't. I had no certainty of that, but that's the way I went.
I think that brings up a really great point, because we do tend to limit ourselves into between society or family or parents or whatever, telling us, no, you can't do that. You'll never do that. Don't work on that. That's not for you. Between that and just the natural fears of the unknown, of what if I fail, there's so many reasons for us not to do something, but there's only one reason for us to do it, which is why not? If you want it, there's no reason not to do it. But we psych ourselves out all the time with our bodies, with our health, with the things that we want to do. And you just come right over that and say, nope, I'm going to do exactly the opposite of all that. And you're still here and you're flying a plane.
Right. I mean, it was a strategy to survive. This was all strategies. I had this strategy when I was in my early teens. I used to say I was going to spit death in the eye. And that's what I would do. And unfortunately, one of the things I did to do that, I started smoking. I was smoking 3 packs a day of Tarrington 100s.
Wow. That was
until one day I realized how out of breath I was. And then I just quit cold turkey. But that was actually part of my strategy. Right. But it was really, like I said, not all my strategies were that brilliant.
Well, I mean, you have to have some trial and error, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's the other thing people are afraid of. Everybody's afraid to take a risk. I'm afraid not to take risk, right? And everybody's afraid that if they take a risk, they're going to fail. And if you're trying something new, of course you're going to fail. That's the way it works. And then by failing, you're going to learn how to do it.
And again, failure is one of those buzzwords that's just so negative that we tend to, well, I can't have that on my record. I don't want to have another failure. But if you look at it from, say, Thomas Edison's standpoint, it wasn't a failure. It was just another way not to make a light bulb.
Exactly.
It really is our mindset, our attitude that really controls all of this.
Yes. And mindset was one of my strategies. Your mindset, I figured it out a long time ago. Mindset is everything. I'll tell you, I haven't really talked about this in any interview, but when I was 17 and I had this drug reaction, and my mother was a nurse, and my heart rate was down in the high 30s. It's right on the border. And the doctor told her, do not move him. If he survives the night, bring him in tomorrow. Imagine that. Imagine your mother, if you're the mother being told that. Then I had the experience. And then the next day, though, I knew that I was okay because of what had happened the day before to me, but they didn't know that. But I was still like connected to something. And I passed an EKG machine as they were bringing me into the room. Now, back then, we're talking about the 60s, EKG machines were the size of the big ovens, the big microwave ovens. And they had a 4-inch CRT on them, the cathode ray tube, where the little squiggle line would go. And I don't know what made me do it, but I said, I need that machine. And they were hooking me up to a EKG, but I was going to be monitored at the central station. But I wanted the machine next to my bed, and I was really fragile. And my doctor, I asked the nurse, could I have that machine? I asked her repeatedly. She wouldn't let me have it. And then my doctor came in and he said, I can't let you have it. And then I said, either get that machine in here and teach me how to use it, or I'm going to stand up on this bed, jump up and down and scream. Now, had I done that, I'd have killed myself.
Yeah,
but I meant every word of it. And he knew I meant it. Next thing you know, they're bringing in the machine, they're teaching me how to use it. And what I did was I invented biofeedback. Nobody was using it back then. And I just stared at the machine for 3 days, willing my heart to make that, because they would go past 3 times sometimes without a beat. And that's how irregular my heartbeat was then. And then when it was all done, my doctor said to me, the only reason why you're alive is because of you. So, if you have a gut feeling about your health, what I'm trying to say is you got to run with it.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. But you also have to stay in the mindset of, okay, this is my diagnosis from one doctor. This is one doctor's opinion based on, what they're seeing. If it seems negative, don't just jump right into that and go, well, this is how it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah. You bring up something interesting too, talking about when you're in the hospital, wear your own clothes. I think this is a really big thing because it again goes with that mindset of I'm not a patient in a hospital. I have control over what I'm doing. I'm just in the hospital right now.
Yes. And it's really funny because the last time my last transplant was at Cedars-Sinai in LA. And I had a doctor, Dr. Patel, who came into my room and he said, I wanted to do a study on patients who wear street clothes because I had the feeling, and that's why I did it, and I was doing it for a while now, and not just then, that you get treated differently if you're in street clothes than you do if you're in a gown. Mm-hmm. And I just made sure I was in a button-down shirt. They had actually easier access to me than if I was in a gown because they'd have to pull it up over, right? I button-down shirt and sweat bottoms, and no doctor had any problem with that. Mm-hmm. But they all treated me differently than the guy in the gown.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, I was just talking to my dad about this last night. Back in the day, you used to go into a bank and everybody would be wearing a suit or a dress. It was very professional. You felt like you were somewhere prestigious when you walked in there, like you could trust these people with your money. Nowadays, it's T-shirts, sweatshirts, not dressed up. And it feels a lot different to me. And so I see exactly what you're saying.
Yeah. Yeah. He said that he did want to do a study on it, and I hope he did. But I do know that that's one of the strategies you have to use in a hospital is you have to be in street clothes. It does make them look at you differently.
Well, it makes sense when you think about it. Now, I want to talk to you about the book because this is really, I mean, you're telling your story. You've got the strategies in there. How deep do you go into how it was with meeting the family of your second donor?
In this book, I don't go into it at all.
Okay.
Because I only go to my first heart transplant in this book, because I figured that the second heart transplant would be just the same story over again. So I ended it there. I ended it at the heart attack that caused the second heart transplant. I had a heart attack because of rejection. I rejected my first heart. But I'll tell you about the family because I think I should, because I owed them so much, My first donor, they never responded to my letters, which is their right. And from what I understand, only 3% of donors ever respond to a letter from a recipient. Only 3%.
It's got to be tough. I mean, from their perspective, it's them, but it's not them at the same time,
Yeah, and they've had enough hurt. They don't need to revisit it. I totally get it. And the fact that my first family didn't answer my letters, I'm fine with that. I was able to learn a few things about him. I know that he was African American. I know that he was a professional hairdresser, and I know that he was married with children. That's what I learned. That's all I could learn about him. And I knew his age. He was 36, and 37. And he was 36, and I was 37 on my first transplant. But on my second transplant, oddly enough, he was a professional hairdresser with children.
Wow.
Except that he was half Hispanic, a quarter Australian, and a quarter Italian. But I wrote the letters to the family, and the mother, after 2 years, wrote me back because it was just too raw for them,
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, really. So Susan Jacobo is the mother, and she wrote me back. Her son, David Jason Jacobo, was my donor. And David's right here in my treasure chest. And his father was David. But she told me that he wasn't listed as a donor. But at the time when they asked her, she said she just knew it would be something he'd want to do. And so she said yes. And he was one of those donors who gave the average donor can give eight donations, and he did way more than that. So he was probably a tissue donor. He probably did bone and ligaments and things like that as well. But he saved a lot of lives and improved a lot of lives.
I bet he helped a lot of people during his life too. I just feel like he was probably that kind of person.
Yeah, I have a picture of him with his. I have a composite picture of him with each of his 4 children, and it's a heartbreak to me. But I went to LA, and the mother. I arranged to meet with the family, and they had. My wife who came with me, they had literally the entire family there. They're mostly Hispanic. The husband is Hispanic. The mother is half Hispanic. And so, big family, like Italians, and there were probably 50 people there, cousins and aunts and uncles. And it was just they were so warming. And the ex-wife of my donor said to me, "You realize you're family now." And that's how I've been treated ever since. And they're just incredibly lovely people. But the thing that was really touching was that I knew they'd want to listen to the heart. I just didn't want to have people putting their heads on my chest. I think that would have freaked me out.
Right. Yeah.
No, I really.
Yeah. No. That would be weird for me.
Right. So my wife is a nurse, and she brought her stethoscope. So of all the people that were there, all the people who listened were women. None of the men would listen. The father wouldn't listen, which I thought is really interesting. It was an interesting sociological thing. But, the mother listened, the aunt listened, the sister listened, the daughter listened, meaning the parents' daughter listened. And then David's daughter listened, and a couple other people listened, but mostly aunts and things like that, and cousins. And but it was really something when the mother caught the beat, when she just went like this. She just started going like this. She started going, and I'll just never, because she's right here,
Right,
and I'll just never forget that the way. And then the daughter was 7 years old. And she was really conflicted about listening. And she couldn't get the beat at first. And then when she did, watching her face was like watching a kaleidoscope of emotion. I mean, it was almost heartbreaking but the family was just fabulous to us. And we're in contact now,
Well, I think it would be enough if you got his liver or a kidney or something like that. I mean, that's pretty amazing as it is. But I think the heart of all the things that you could receive, that's probably the most precious and the most touching of all the gifts that you could get from someone else. Just curious, I would imagine that the time from the time that they remove it from the donor to putting it in the recipient, that has to be a very short amount of time. Of the window of opportunity to get this right has got to be small.
Ideally, it's 4 hours. It can stretch to 6 in some cases.
That's not a lot of time, especially you would have to be in the same city, obviously, to make that work.
Well, it depends. Now, if you're in New York, it's hard because there's no helicopters allowed in New York City. Ever since that Pan Am crash, there's still like Neanderthals about that.
Oh,
but
wow.
I was in LA, and my wife actually got a photograph of the helicopter coming in because the heart had been in La Mirinda. I can never pronounce the name of that town. La Mirinda. And that was about over an hour away by car. And they just flew it in, but they were expecting it. They didn't, when they're receiving the gifts from a donor, and thank you for not using the word harvesting, because that just drives me crazy.
Yeah, we're not animals.
Yeah, exactly. Or plants.
Right. Yeah.
When they're going to do when they're going to receive the gifts from a donor, they bring in all the recipient teams come in at once. They're all there waiting, right? And because of the way the organs, what you were talking about, the necrotic time, that's what it's called, the necrotic time for the organs, the lungs and the heart have the least. So the first team goes in and takes out the heart, the second team takes out the lungs, and then they go after the liver and the kidneys, because those can last a long time.
Wow. You had so many miracles in your life for everything to come together the way that it has, but obviously your perspective, your attitude, your outlook has given those miracles every chance. I think without that, you could have been gone a number of times by this point.
I could not agree with you more. I am multi-blessed. And Scott, you just really, may I expound on something that I've never talked about?
Please.
You just said the word miracle. And I think most people don't understand what a miracle is. Most people think a miracle is bringing somebody back from the dead or moving a mountain. If you're looking at God, and that all the power that you're talking about of a miracle, those are parlor tricks. What I think a miracle is that my doctor from probably centuries ago, the right people had children who had children who had children who had children to bring her there. Same thing with my donor, same thing with every person in the operating room, every person who was a cog in the wheel that saved my life. It has to go back centuries for it all to come together at that one moment. That to me is the miracle.
Oh, absolutely. I like to think about things sometimes and think, okay, let's take the autoclave that was in your room at that time. You think about the fact that somebody had to think it up. Somebody had to design it. Somebody had to perfect all the little pieces. I mean, there's so many people that are involved in just making that one machine, let alone the detail of an EEG machine or all the other things that you've experienced. It's so hard to not have a great appreciation when you take that deep look into something and think about everything that had to come together for that to be in existence for you to be able to utilize it when you needed it.
Yes. And literally I was born right at the right moment because I was the first, and I mean, it's really, I mean, the reason my book is named Grateful Guilt for a reason, and Grateful Guilt is because when I was in Transplant Speakers International, when I was the vice president of that, we developed a program that at that point, nobody was really acknowledging that recipients had survivor's guilt. We were the organization that brought that forward. And I designed the program. I came up with it. My wife and I named it. And the president, Frank Bodino, and I massaged it and put the program together. And that was when we started to teach organ procurement organizations that there was really such a thing as survivor's guilt in transplants. And I think that gratitude is the thing that you have to have every day if you want to have a successful life. And you have to be grateful in everything. Now, grateful guilt was because I was grateful, but I felt guilty. So that was the workshop that we had originally with Transplant Speakers International. But if you want, if somebody listening or watching has somebody in the hospital or who's really sick, and they're moaning and groaning about how life is unfair and how, and they're just complaining nonstop about how awful everything is for them. Just go down a little thing with them and go, well, wait a minute. Are you in a hospital? Are you in a modern hospital? Do you have doctors who care? Do you have modern medicine? Do you have blankets? Are you being fed? Are you warm or are you cool? Depending on the season. I mean, just start going down all the things that they do, because there are people in countries that they don't have that stuff. And there you are, you have it. So start being grateful. And if you start being grateful, it changes your attitude and it changes your health.
And if not, there's still that lobotomy option that we talked about earlier.
Yes, there is.
Well, let me ask you one more thing. If you have another minute, I realize that we're a little bit over our time. So thinking about survivor's guilt, this is not something that I've ever experienced. So I'm coming to this as a complete outsider. There would be a difference between somebody who died so that you could live, somebody who jumped on a grenade so that you wouldn't get the blast, versus somebody who was dying and you were the recipient of something that they had that they were no longer going to use. I imagine that those types of guilt are two very different things, but probably just as traumatic.
That is really, really an insightful question. And no one's ever asked me that. And that's a really good question. It doesn't matter to the survivor. To us, we're always being told they didn't die for you. We know that. We know they were in that car accident. Somebody shot them. They fell off a ladder. We know that. But we've been sick for like a year waiting for an organ. And we think, and we're thinking about the person, every one of us would have gotten in the way of that accident for that person because we were already deadly sick.
Right.
So that's I think really where it comes from, if that answers your question.
It does. Yeah, that's kind of what I was figuring the answer might be. But again, coming to this as a complete outsider, not having any experience like that, it's a curious thing. It's kind of like if your mother dies in childbirth. I know that there's a huge survivor's guilt from that because obviously they did die so that you could live. It wasn't necessarily intentional. Maybe in some cases they're like, if you deliver this baby, you're not going to make it. Well, I'm going to deliver this baby anyway. I'm sure that happens. But yeah, I would imagine that really could take a toll on somebody. Is it something that you ever not necessarily get over? Because I think there's always fragments of it. But is it something that at some point you can kind of accept and not feel guilty about it on the daily basis?
It took me about 8 years.
Wow.
But now it's manageable. Now it's more like, okay, it's life. This is just life. And the way I've mitigated it is I take care of the organ to the best of my abilities. I maintain a good weight. I eat well. I exercise. I do everything I can to maintain that organ because I owe it to the family.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's certainly understandable. And I'm glad that you have developed a relationship with them. I think that's absolutely wonderful for all of you.
Yeah. And I just want to mention too that my book is now not only on Amazon and in many bookstores, but I'm also now my audiobook just came out.
Yeah, I was just about to say that. Actually, I'm going to have the links in the show notes. It's actually on a host of audiobook sites, which is great. I always suggest when the author reads their own book, I always suggest the audiobook. Some people can't listen to audiobooks, and I get that, but I like to hear the inflection in your voice when I'm hearing what you're saying. I like to hear the passion and the depth of what you're expressing. You don't get that in print. I mean, print is great, and you can, read here and there, but to me, there's really something special about an author reading their own book.
Well, I appreciate that, but believe me, I'm no Scott Haskin.
I'm not sure if I am sometimes. Well, you have a great speaking voice, so I'm sure that the book is great. I'm going to check it out myself.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen, for coming on the show, for sharing your story. It is amazing. And I feel so grateful just to get the chance to talk to you and hear about this. And what a journey you've been on, my friend.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. And honestly, this has been one of the really best interviews I've had. You have asked some really good questions.
Well, thank you very much. That means a lot to me because I know you've done quite a number of them over the years.
Yeah, I have, but you asked some of the best questions I've been asked.
Well, thank you. We'll come back on and let's do this again sometime.
I'm here.
Sounds great. Well, in the meantime, take care, keep those positive strategies going, and thank you for sharing them with everybody else. Go check out the books, folks. It is in the links in the show notes. If you can't find them, just email me, scott@scotthaskin.com. I will help you because this is a book that, if you have any doubts about how life should be, this is the one for you to read without a doubt. Thank you so much, Stephen.
Thank you, Scott. Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.